The psychologist Howard Gardner, in the late 20th century, laid out a theory of what he called multiple intelligences. It asserted that people have different kinds of intelligences or abilities, and that simply to ask whether someone is smart or to ask them about a set of facts isn't enough to assess their abilities. Because some people have spatial or visual intelligence, others, he said, have musical, others have linguistic, interpersonal, or bodily intelligence. And essentially what the theory highlights about the human condition is that every person has a different set of strengths. And it's not enough to say someone is smart or isn't. In this parasha, we read about the choshen, the breastplate that was worn by the Kohen Gadol. And on this breastplate, there were 12 stones of different colors, reflecting the 12 tribes of Israel. And in fact, the names of the 12 tribes were etched upon these stones. And this was a reminder every time someone would look at the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, that every tribe brought something unique to the table. Every tribe of Israel had a strength, had a weakness, had an advantage that the tribe could contribute to the whole of the community. And when you think about our current community, our tribes of Israel, our different facets of our nation, this remains true even to today. Think about the many different approaches to Judaism. The Chassidut, the mystical and spiritual side of Judaism, the intellectual or rational side of Judaism, the eco-Jewish movements, the many different aspects of our Jewish community, the many different sub-communities within our community, all bring an important piece of the puzzle. And if you imagine that breastplate, and you recognize that the different stones each had a unique color, it reminds us that there is a spectrum or a prism of colors that is only more beautiful because of its variety. When looking at the Kohen Gadol, everyone could see themselves in the leadership and could see that they held an important part of the nation. Interestingly, within the breastplate was the Urim V'Tumim, which was basically a mechanism through which the Kohen Gadol, or the nation, could speak to God. There was a piece of paper with the name of God written down on it and inserted into the breastplate, and it allowed Moses, or the leadership, to communicate with God and to ask God answers to important questions. And God's answer would come through the breastplate by illuminating the letters of the 12 tribes' names. However, the Talmud tells us that since some of the letters were missing, some of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet were not represented in the names of those 12 tribes. For example, there was no letter Tzadi among those names. Then the names of the patriarchs were also added to the breastplate: Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And finally, to include the letter Tet, the words Shivtei Yah, the tribes of God, were also written on the breastplate. And so in this breastplate, not only were represented the strengths, the many different aspects of the tribes of Israel, but even their history, their earlier generations, their patriarchs were given a nod. And the Shvatim, the tribes of God as a whole, were also represented, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. How do we honor the different strengths of the people in our lives? If we feel frustrated with a colleague, a friend, even a spouse, we may lament their incompetence. We certainly do it when we're upset about customer service. It's not simply that they're incompetent, though. Ask ourselves, what is their competence? What strengths do they bring to the table? What color or space would they fill on that breastplate? Would they be as part of that Urim V'Tumim? Every person has a place in the nation. Everyone fills an important role in our community. Shabbat Shalom.
ואתה תצווה את בני ישראל ויקחו אליך שמן זית זך כתית למאור להעלות נר תמיד באוהל מועד, מחוץ לפרוכת אשר על העדות.
Parashat Tetzaveh, this week's Torah portion, picks up right where last week's Torah portion of Terumah ends. Terumah detailed all the vessels, the different apparatuses that were to be used in the Mishkan, in the portable tabernacle, and which would later be used in the Holy Temple. This week's Torah portion, with the exception of the pure olive oil discussed at the beginning, and the inaugural service followed by the golden altar discussed at the end of the parasha, primarily deals with the clothing that the Kohen Gadol and the other Kohanim needed to wear in this holy space. Now, this parasha has a particular positive bias for me, as it is my bar mitzvah parsha. And I ask, was it really necessary for the Torah to go to such great length to detail not only what the Kohanim needed to wear, but down to how they were to be fabricated? And the answer is absolutely yes. And I want to use the following analogy to explain. When one visits an important place, like a castle, for instance, let's say Buckingham Palace, does one expect the guards there to look a particular way? Do they have a role to play? God says later on in the Torah that the Kohanim were Veshamru et Mishmarti. They were actually the guardians of his service. They guarded that which was holy. And yes, when we do go to an important place such as Buckingham Palace, the guards there do have a particular way of dress, and not a single button is out of place. The ritual is so particular that you do not waver from it. How much more so was it important to have these guardians of the holy service dressed in a particular way? In our days where we do not have the Holy Temple, I think that guardianship falls on each and every one of us. May we guard our traditions accordingly, not only with our dress, but the way that we behave as well. May we reflect positively on Judaism. Shabbat Shalom.
על הכתפות האפוד, אבני זיכרון לבני ישראל, ונשא אהרון את שמותם לפני עד השם, על שתי כתפיו לזיכרון.